On a quiet October night in 2011, 10-month-old Lisa Irwin was asleep in her crib in Kansas City. By sunrise, she had vanished. An open window, 3 missing cell phones, and no sign of baby Lisa anywhere. What began as a desperate search for a missing child quickly turned into a maze of contradictions, conflicting stories from the parents, unusual behavior caught on camera, and witnesses reporting a man carrying a baby in the dark. 13 years later, Lisa is still missing. No arrests, no answers. So what really happened inside that house on that October night? And why does this case remain one of America's most unsettling mysteries? Before we continue, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and subscribe to Seek Stories for more true crime cases. To understand what happened on that October night, we need to know the Irwin family and the life they had built in Kansas City. Deborah Bradley and Jeremy Irwin weren't your typical American family, but they were trying their best. Deborah, known as Debbie to friends and family, was a young mother in her late 20s. She had 2 sons from a previous relationship, 6-year-old Michael and 5-year-old Blake. Jeremy Irwin was an electrician who worked long, irregular hours to support the family. He wasn't the biological father of Debbie's older boys, but he loved them as his own. When Lisa Renee Irwin was born on November 11, 2010, she became the light of the household. With her bright blue eyes, blonde wisps of hair, and infectious smile, Lisa was the baby everyone adored. Debbie often said that Lisa completed their family. For Jeremy, Lisa was his first biological child, and he doted on her constantly. The family lived in a modest home on North Lister Avenue in Kansas City's Northland neighborhood. It was a working-class area, the kind of place where neighbors knew each other's names and kids played in the streets until the streetlights came on. The house itself was small but comfortable, a single-story ranch-style home with a fenced backyard. It had 3 bedrooms, one for Debbie and Jeremy, one for the boys, and one for baby Lisa. The neighborhood had its quirks. Like many urban areas, there had been occasional property crimes, stolen bikes, broken car windows, the usual frustrations of city living, but violent crime was rare. People felt safe enough to leave their doors unlocked, at least during the day. It was the kind of community where a missing child was unthinkable. In the months leading up to October 2011, life was relatively normal for the Irwin family. Jeremy's work as an electrician meant he often worked night shifts, leaving Debbie alone with the 3 children. She had grown accustomed to the routine: dinner, bath time, bedtime stories, then quiet evenings to herself while the kids slept. Sometimes her brother, who lived nearby, would stop by to keep her company. Sometimes she'd just enjoy the peace after a long day of managing 3 young children. Debbie was an attentive mother by all accounts, though she would later admit she wasn't perfect. She struggled with the exhaustion that comes with caring for an infant and 2 energetic boys. She had moments of feeling overwhelmed, moments where a glass of wine at the end of the day felt necessary rather than optional. But she loved her children fiercely. Friends and family would later say that whatever else might be true, Debbie's devotion to her kids was genuine. Jeremy worked hard to provide for the family. His job as an electrician required technical skill and often took him away at odd hours. He was the kind of father who came home tired but still made time to play with his kids. He'd installed security lights around their property and made sure the doors had good locks. He worried about keeping his family safe, even in a neighborhood he considered relatively secure. In early October 2011, everything seemed fine on the surface. The boys were starting school. Lisa was hitting her developmental milestones. She could sit up on her own, babble, and light up any room with her smile. Debbie posted photos of Lisa on social media, as many young mothers do, showing off her beautiful baby girl to friends and family. In those photos, Lisa looked happy and healthy, dressed in cute outfits with bows in her wispy blonde hair. But beneath the surface of this seemingly ordinary life, there were stresses. Money was tight, as it often is for young families. Jeremy's irregular work schedule meant Debbie spent many nights alone. The responsibilities of caring for 3 children could be isolating. And like many couples navigating the challenges of parenthood, Debbie and Jeremy had their disagreements. Nothing unusual. Nothing that would predict what was about to happen. October 4th, 2011 started like any other Tuesday. Jeremy left for work in the early evening, heading to a job site where he'd be working overnight. Debbie was left with the 3 children. The boys had school the next day, so bedtime routines were important. Lisa, at 10 months old, still needed regular feedings and diaper changes throughout the evening. That afternoon, Debbie's brother had stopped by. The two of them sat on the front porch while the kids played nearby. As the sun set and the temperature dropped, Debbie brought out a box of wine. It wasn't unusual for her to have a drink or two in the evening. It helped her relax after a long day with the kids. But that night, she would later admit, she had more than usual. As darkness fell over North Lister Avenue, Debbie began the familiar evening routine. She fed the boys dinner, made sure they brushed their teeth, and got them ready for bed. Baby Lisa had her bottle and was changed into her purple shorts and purple shirt with white kittens on it. Debbie carried Lisa to her crib in the nursery, laying her down gently. The room had a window that faced the side yard, covered with blinds. The door was left slightly open, as parents often do so they can hear if their baby cries. According to what Debbie would tell police, she checked on all 3 children around 10:30 that night. The boys were asleep in their room. Lisa was peaceful in her crib, sleeping soundly. Debbie then went to her own bedroom, turned on the lights, and eventually fell asleep herself, with the bedroom light still on. She would later say she had been more intoxicated than usual that night, which explained why she fell into such a deep sleep. Everything was quiet on North Lister Avenue. The neighborhood was settling in for the night. Streetlights cast their orange glow across empty sidewalks. A few dogs barked in the distance. Inside the Irwin home, 3 children slept while their mother dozed in the next room. Nothing seemed wrong, nothing felt dangerous. But what happened in the hours that followed would shatter this family forever. Jeremy Irwin's shift at the electrical job site ended just before 4 in the morning on October 4th. He was exhausted, ready to get home, and maybe catch a few hours of sleep before starting the day with his family. The drive back to North Lister Avenue took about 30 minutes through the quiet Kansas City streets. As Jeremy pulled into the driveway shortly after 4 a.m., something immediately struck him as wrong. The front lights were on, which was unusual. Debbie normally turned off most of the lights before going to bed. He parked his truck and approached the house, his work boots heavy on the concrete driveway. When Jeremy tried the front door, it was unlocked. His heart rate picked up slightly. He distinctly remembered locking that door before leaving for work. He always locked the doors, always. It was one of those habits born from being a father, from wanting to keep his family safe. Jeremy stepped inside, expecting to find Debbie had simply forgotten to lock up after her brother left. The living room was quiet. He walked down the hallway toward the bedrooms, still in his work clothes, thinking about how he'd need to remind Debbie about keeping the doors locked. But then he noticed Lisa's bedroom door was open wider than usual. He paused, listening for the familiar sounds of a sleeping baby, the soft breathing, the occasional rustle of movement. He heard nothing. Jeremy walked to Lisa's room and looked into the crib. It was empty. For a moment, his brain couldn't process what his eyes were seeing. The purple sheets were rumpled, but there was no baby. Maybe Debbie had brought Lisa to bed with her. That happened sometimes when Lisa was fussy. Jeremy hurried to the master bedroom, expecting to find his daughter curled up beside Debbie. But when he burst through the bedroom door, there was only Debbie, asleep alone in the bed with the light still on. "Where's Lisa?" Jeremy's voice was sharp, urgent. "Debbie, where's Lisa?" Deborah Bradley jolted awake, confused and groggy. "What?" "She's in her crib." "No, she's not. She's not there. Where is she?" The panic in Jeremy's voice cut through Debbie's drowsiness instantly. She scrambled out of bed, both of them rushing to Lisa's room, as if checking again would somehow make their daughter reappear. The crib remained empty. The purple outfit Lisa had been wearing was gone too. That's when they noticed the window. The window in Lisa's bedroom was open, pushed up from the bottom. The screen was damaged, bent inward, as if someone had pried it open from the outside. "Oh, God," Debbie whispered. "Oh, my God, no." They searched the house frantically. The boys' room, Michael and Blake, were still sleeping soundly, undisturbed. The bathroom, the closets, under beds, in cabinets, every irrational place desperate parents check when their child is missing. Lisa was nowhere. Jeremy grabbed his phone to call 911. That's when he realized something else was wrong. His phone wasn't where he usually left it. He asked Debbie for her phone. She couldn't find hers either. A quick search revealed that all three of the family's cell phones were missing: Jeremy's, Debbie's, and an additional phone they kept in the house. With shaking hands, Jeremy picked up the landline telephone. His voice cracked as he spoke the words no parent should ever have to say, "My baby is missing. Someone took my baby." The call came in to Kansas City Police Dispatch at 4:13 a.m. on October 4, 2011. A 10-month-old infant named Lisa Renee Irwin had vanished from her crib. Possible abduction, possible window entry, parents requesting immediate assistance. The first officers arrived at the Irwin home within minutes. By 4:30 a.m., the small house on North Lister Avenue was flooded with police cars, their red and blue lights cutting through the early morning darkness. Officers cordoned off the property with yellow crime scene tape. Detectives were called in. The FBI was notified. As the sun began to rise over Kansas City that October morning, word spread quickly through the neighborhood. Something terrible had happened at the Irwin house. A baby was missing. Lisa Irwin had seemingly vanished into thin air. The initial police response was swift and thorough. Officers conducted an immediate search of the property and surrounding area. They checked the backyard, the nearby alleys, and the homes of close neighbors. Search dogs were brought in to track any scent trails. The dogs indicated interest in an area near the home, but couldn't establish a clear trail leading away from the property. Inside the house, forensic technicians began processing the scene. They photographed everything: the empty crib, the open window, the bent screen, every room in the house. They dusted for fingerprints on the window frame and sill. They collected any potential evidence that might reveal what happened during those dark hours while Jeremy was at work. Deborah Bradley and Jeremy Irwin sat in their living room, surrounded by police officers asking questions. Both were in shock, struggling to comprehend that their daughter was gone. Debbie was crying, her face pale and drawn. Jeremy kept running his hands through his hair, his leg bouncing nervously as he tried to answer questions coherently. The questions started simply. When did you last see Lisa? What was she wearing? Does she have any medical conditions? Is there anyone who would want to harm your family? But as the morning wore on, the questions became more pointed, more suspicious. Detective Steve Young was assigned as the lead investigator on the case. A veteran of the Kansas City Police Department with years of experience in missing persons cases, Young knew the statistics. He knew that in cases of missing children, especially infants, the answers often lay close to home. The vast majority of child abductions are committed by family members or people known to the family. Stranger abductions of infants from their homes are exceedingly rare. So, while the search expanded into the neighborhood and beyond, much of the investigative focus remained on Deborah and Jeremy. Debbie recounted her evening multiple times. She'd put Lisa to bed around 6:40 p.m., she initially told police. She'd checked on her around 10:30 p.m. and Lisa was fine, sleeping peacefully. Then Debbie had gone to bed herself. The timeline was clear, she insisted. Lisa had been in her crib at 10:30 p.m. and was gone by 4:13 a.m. when Jeremy called police. But as investigators dug deeper, cracks began to appear in that timeline. What had Debbie been doing between 6:40 p.m. and 10:30 p.m.? She'd been on the front porch with her brother, drinking wine and talking. How much wine? Maybe 5 glasses, she admitted. Maybe more. The box wine had been mostly empty by the end of the evening. Her brother had left around 10:30 p.m., and that's when she checked on the kids and went to bed. Wait, if her brother left at 10:30 p.m. and she checked on Lisa at 10:30 p.m., which happened first? The timeline was getting fuzzy. Debbie was trying to remember through the haze of alcohol and shock. Maybe she checked on Lisa before her brother left. Or was it after? She wasn't entirely sure. Then came the question that would haunt the investigation. "Mrs. Bradley, are you certain you checked on Lisa at 10:30 p.m.? Debbie paused. The truth was, she'd been quite drunk that night. Her memories of the evening were blurry. She remembered putting Lisa to bed earlier, around 6:40 p.m. She remembered drinking wine with her brother. But did she actually get up and walk to Lisa's room at 10:30 p.m. to check on her? "I think so," Debbie said, her voice uncertain. "I thought I did." "But you're not sure?" The silence was damning. Debbie Bradley couldn't definitively say she had checked on her daughter at 10:30 p.m. In fact, when pressed, she admitted the last time she was absolutely certain she'd seen Lisa was when she put her to bed at 6:40 p.m. 6:40 p.m., not 10:30 p.m. That changed everything. If Lisa had last been confirmed in her crib at 6:40 p.m., that meant she could have been taken any time between then and 4:13 a.m. the next morning. That was nearly 10 hours. The window of opportunity for an abductor had just expanded massively. Jeremy Irwin, meanwhile, had his own timeline to account for. He'd left for work at 6 p.m. on the evening of October 3rd, arrived at the job site around 6:30 p.m., and worked through the night with co-workers who could verify his presence. He'd left the job site around 3:40 a.m. and arrived home at approximately 4:10 a.m., finding Lisa missing moments later. His timeline checked out. He had an alibi. But Deborah did not. She had been alone with the children during the critical hours. She had been drinking heavily. And now she couldn't account for Lisa's whereabouts for nearly 10 hours. To investigators, this raised obvious red flags. By mid-morning, news crews had descended on North Lister Avenue. The story was spreading fast. Baby Lisa Irwin, 10 months old, missing from her home. Local news stations led with the story. National outlets picked it up by afternoon. Lisa's face, those bright blue eyes and sweet smile, was suddenly everywhere. On television, on missing person posters, shared across social media. The Amber Alert was issued. Lisa Irwin was described as 30 inches tall, weighing approximately 30 pounds, with blonde hair and blue eyes. Last seen wearing purple shorts and a purple shirt with white kittens. Anyone with information was urged to contact Kansas City Police immediately. The community response was immediate and overwhelming. Neighbors organized search parties, combing through nearby wooded areas, parks, and abandoned buildings. Volunteers distributed flyers throughout Kansas City. The Kansas City Fire Department joined the search, checking storm drains and any confined spaces where a small child might be hidden. The FBI deployed additional resources, bringing in specialized teams trained in child abduction cases. But despite hundreds of volunteers, dozens of law enforcement officers, and sophisticated search equipment, there was no sign of baby Lisa. As the first day of searching came to an end with no breakthroughs, a grim reality began to set in. Lisa Irwin had been gone for more than 12 hours. With each passing hour, the statistical likelihood of finding her alive decreased. Everyone involved in the search knew the numbers, even if no one wanted to say them out loud. That night, as darkness fell over Kansas City once again, Deborah Bradley and Jeremy Irwin sat in their home, now a crime scene, and faced a terrifying truth. Their daughter was out there somewhere, and they had no idea if they would ever see her again. But what investigators were about to discover would make this case even more complicated. As the investigation into Lisa Irwin's disappearance intensified, detectives began piecing together a complex puzzle. Each new piece of information seemed to raise more questions than it answered, and at the center of it all were Deborah Bradley and Jeremy Irwin, whose behavior would become increasingly scrutinized. The morning after Lisa's disappearance, Detective Young and his team returned to the Irwin home to conduct more detailed interviews. They needed to understand exactly what happened that night, and the only people who could provide those answers were Debbie and Jeremy. Deborah sat across from detectives, exhausted and emotional. She'd barely slept. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, but she tried to answer every question, to help in any way she could. She recounted the evening again, this time with more details. She'd put Lisa to bed at 6:40 p.m., she confirmed. Lisa was in her purple outfit, had just finished a bottle, and seemed sleepy. Debbie laid her in the crib and left the room. The evening was warm, so the window in Lisa's room might have been opened slightly for air circulation. Or maybe it was closed. Debbie honestly couldn't remember for certain. After putting Lisa down, Debbie had spent time with her 2 older sons, getting them ready for bed. Then her brother arrived and they went outside to sit on the front porch. It was a pleasant October evening, and they talked while the boys played in the yard. That's when Debbie started drinking the boxed wine. 5 glasses, she'd said initially, but now, pressed by detectives, she admitted it might have been more. Maybe 10 glasses over the course of several hours. The box had been nearly full when they started, nearly empty when her brother left. She'd been significantly intoxicated by the end of the night. Her brother had left around 10:30 p.m. Debbie came inside, turned on the front porch light, and went to check on the children, or at least she thought she did. The memories were foggy. She remembered the boys were sleeping. As for Lisa, this is where Debbie's certainty wavered. She couldn't swear she had actually looked in Lisa's crib at 10:30 p.m. "I meant to," she told detectives, her voice breaking. "I always check on them, but I was drunk. I don't remember walking into her room. I remember thinking I should check, but I don't remember doing it." This admission was devastating. It meant the last confirmed sighting of Lisa was at 6:40 p.m., nearly 4 hours earlier than initially reported. Deborah also revealed something else that struck investigators as significant. At some point during the evening, she couldn't remember exactly when, she had turned off all the lights in the house and gone to bed. But she'd left the bedroom light on because she'd been too drunk to get up and turn it off. When Jeremy came home, that bedroom light was still on, which is how he found her sleeping. Why was this important? Because if Debbie had turned off all the other lights in the house before bed, that suggested a normal nighttime routine. It didn't match with the panic of discovering a missing child. If she'd realized Lisa was gone before going to sleep, surely she would have been frantically searching, making phone calls, waking the boys. The fact that she'd simply gone to bed suggested she believed everything was normal, unless detectives thought something else had happened. Jeremy Irwin's interviews were more straightforward. He'd left for work at 6 p.m., arrived at the job site at 6:30 p.m., and worked continuously until 3:40 a.m. His co-workers confirmed his presence. The job site had security measures that corroborated his timeline. He'd called Debbie from his work phone around 10:30 p.m., right around the time her brother was leaving, just to check in. The call had been brief. Everything seemed normal. When Jeremy arrived home at 4:10 a.m., he'd noticed the lights on and the front door unlocked. Then he'd discovered Lisa missing and called police immediately. His reaction had been exactly what you'd expect from a father discovering his daughter was gone: shock, panic, desperation. But investigators noticed something in Jeremy's demeanor. While Debbie was emotional and tearful, Jeremy seemed more controlled. Some interpreted this as shock. Others wondered if it indicated something more sinister. The physical evidence from the house painted a confusing picture. The window in Lisa's room had definitely been tampered with. The screen was bent inward, consistent with someone prying it open from the outside. But there was no clear evidence of forced entry, no scratches on the windowsill that would suggest someone struggling to climb through. No muddy footprints or disturbed dirt in the flower bed beneath the window. The 3 missing cell phones were another mystery. Why would an abductor take cell phones? To prevent the parents from calling police immediately? But that didn't make much sense. The house had a landline, which Jeremy had used to call 911. And the phones were old, not particularly valuable. Their disappearance seemed random, unless the abductor needed them for some specific reason. Forensic analysis of the window area found no usable fingerprints. Any DNA evidence would take weeks to process. The crime scene was frustratingly clean. No obvious clues left behind by an intruder. But here's what made investigators suspicious. the family's own behavior in the days following Lisa's disappearance. On October 5th, the second day of the investigation, Deborah Bradley and Jeremy Irwin appeared on local news to make a public plea for Lisa's return. Debbie, wearing a gray hoodie and looking exhausted, spoke through tears. "Please, if you have our daughter, bring her home," Debbie said, her voice shaking. "She's just a baby. She needs her family. We love her so much." Jeremy stood beside her, his arm around Debbie's shoulders, his face drawn with worry. "We just want Lisa back safe," he added. "That's all we want." To many viewers, it was a heartbreaking appeal from desperate parents. But to seasoned investigators, something felt off. The phrasing, the body language, certain word choices, it triggered their instincts. Detective Young had seen hundreds of interviews with parents of missing children. Some rang true, others didn't. This one didn't. On October 6th, 3 days after Lisa's disappearance, police asked Deborah and Jeremy to come to the station for formal, recorded interviews. These would be more intensive, conducted separately, and designed to identify any inconsistencies in their stories. Jeremy agreed without hesitation. Deborah agreed initially, but brought an attorney with her. This immediately raised red flags. Innocent parents typically cooperate fully with police, desperate to do anything that might help find their child. Hiring an attorney, especially this early in an investigation, was often seen as a defensive move. During these interviews, Jeremy remained consistent with his story. He left for work at 6 p.m. He was at the job site all night. He came home at 4:10 a.m. and found Lisa missing. He called police immediately. His story didn't waver. Deborah's interview was more problematic. With her attorney present, she became less cooperative. When detectives pressed her about the timeline, about how much she'd had to drink, about whether she could definitively say she'd checked on Lisa at 10:30 p.m., Debbie grew defensive. "I know what you're trying to do," she said at one point. "You think I did something to my daughter. I didn't. I would never hurt Lisa. Never." But the harder detectives pushed, the more Debbie shut down. Eventually, her attorney advised her to stop answering questions. The interview ended abruptly. For investigators, this was damning. In missing child cases, the parents' cooperation is crucial. When that cooperation evaporates, suspicions naturally intensify. By October 7th, 4 days after Lisa's disappearance, the media narrative was shifting. Initially, news coverage had focused on the search for Lisa and the possibility of an abductor. But now, reporters were asking questions about the parents. Why had Deborah hired an attorney? Why were police spending so much time questioning the family instead of searching for an intruder? What weren't they telling the public? Detective Young called a press conference to address the growing speculation. He stood at a podium, flanked by FBI agents, and delivered a carefully worded statement. "We are exploring every possible lead in Lisa Irwin's disappearance," Young said. "This includes examining all individuals who had access to the home that night. We ask that anyone with information, no matter how insignificant it may seem, please contact our tip line." When a reporter asked directly if the parents were suspects, Young's answer was diplomatic but telling. "We have not ruled anyone out." That single phrase, "we have not ruled anyone out," became the headline on every news outlet. The implication was clear. Deborah Bradley and Jeremy Irwin were under investigation. The public reaction was swift and divided. Some people defended the Irwins, arguing that they were grieving parents being unfairly targeted by police. Others pointed to Debbie's drinking, the conflicting timelines, the hired attorney, and concluded that something was very wrong. Social media erupted with amateur sleuths dissecting every detail of the case, every statement the parents had made, looking for evidence of guilt. Meanwhile, the actual search for Lisa continued, but now it was taking a different direction. On October 8th, 5 days after the disappearance, witness reports began emerging that would add bizarre new dimensions to the case. A woman named Cindy Short came forward with a startling account. She lived several blocks from the Irwin home, and on the night of October 3rd, going into the early morning of October 4th, she'd been up late with her 4-year-old daughter. At approximately 2:15 a.m., Cindy looked out her window and saw something unusual. A man walking down the street carrying something. As he passed under a streetlight, Cindy could see more clearly. He was carrying what appeared to be a baby, dressed only in a diaper. Cindy watched the man continue down the street and disappear around a corner. At the time, she'd thought it was strange. Who takes a baby outside in October at 2 in the morning wearing only a diaper? But she'd assumed it was a father dealing with a fussy child, taking a walk to get the baby to sleep. It happened. But when Cindy saw the news about missing baby Lisa the next day, she immediately called police. The description of what Lisa had been wearing didn't match. Lisa was in purple shorts and a purple shirt, not just a diaper. But the timing was significant. 2:15 a.m. was right in the middle of the window when Lisa could have been taken. Police interviewed Cindy extensively. Could she describe the man? He was Caucasian, she thought, though it was dark. Average height and build. She couldn't make out his face. Could she describe the baby? It looked like an infant, maybe 6 months to a year old. She couldn't tell if it was a boy or girl from that distance. Was it Lisa? The clothing didn't match. But an abductor could have changed a baby's clothes, or Deborah could have been mistaken about what Lisa was wearing. Memory is unreliable, especially under stress and alcohol consumption. Then a second witness came forward. Mike Thompson, who lived in the same general area, reported seeing a man matching a similar description around the same time, carrying what might have been a baby. His account was less detailed than Cindy's, but it seemed to corroborate the sighting. Suddenly, the investigation had a new lead. If these witnesses were accurate, someone had been walking through the neighborhood carrying a baby around 2:15 a.m. That suggested Lisa had been taken from her crib sometime between 6:40 p.m., when Debbie put her down, and 2:15 a.m., when the man was spotted. Police released a composite sketch based on the witness descriptions. The man was drawn as a Caucasian male, possibly in his 30s or 40s, with short hair. The sketch was circulated widely, appearing on news broadcasts and wanted posters throughout Kansas City. Tips started flooding in. People reported seeing men who looked like the sketch. Suspicious individuals were called in for questioning, but none of them panned out. The sketch was too generic, the description too vague. And then the investigation took another turn when police learned about a man named John Jersey Tanco. Jersey Tanco was an electrician who had done some work for a neighbor close to the Irwin home. He had a criminal record that included burglary. On the night of October 3rd, Tanco's former girlfriend reported that he'd been acting strangely. He'd shown up at her house in the middle of the night, around the same time Lisa disappeared, claiming he'd been in the area. Police questioned Tanco extensively. He denied any involvement in Lisa's disappearance, but his alibi was weak. He couldn't clearly account for his whereabouts during the critical hours. His behavior the night of the disappearance had been erratic, and his criminal history made him a compelling suspect. Tanco agreed to take a polygraph test. The results were inconclusive, not definitively deceptive, but not exactly passing either. Investigators searched his home and vehicle, but found no evidence connecting him to Lisa. No baby clothes, no cell phones, nothing. Still, Tanco remained a person of interest. To investigators, he checked many boxes. He was familiar with the neighborhood, had skills as an electrician that might help him disable security systems or navigate houses quietly, had a criminal background, and had been acting suspiciously on the night in question. But without physical evidence or a confession, they couldn't arrest him. Jersey Tanco walked free, though police continued monitoring him. Throughout October, the investigation expanded in multiple directions. Police searched nearby landfills, a horrifying but necessary step in missing child cases. They drained a nearby pond. They interviewed sex offenders in the area. They followed up on hundreds of tips called in by the public. Every lead turned into a dead end. By the end of October, nearly 4 weeks after Lisa's disappearance, the case had reached a frustrating stalemate. There was no body, no ransom demand, no credible suspect. And the two people who knew the most about what happened that night, Deborah Bradley and Jeremy Irwin, were no longer cooperating with police. The relationship between the family and law enforcement had completely broken down. Deborah, feeling attacked and accused, had stopped talking to police entirely. Jeremy, caught between supporting his partner and wanting to find his daughter, was torn but ultimately stood by Debbie. They hired more attorneys. They appeared on national television shows to plead their innocence and beg for Lisa's return, but they wouldn't sit down for additional police interviews. Detective Young made a public statement that would define the rest of the investigation. "We believe someone knows what happened to Lisa Irwin. We believe that until we get answers from the parents, this case will remain unsolved." The implication was unmistakable. Police believed Deborah Bradley, and possibly Jeremy Irwin, were responsible for Lisa's disappearance. But believing it and proving it are two very different things. As winter descended on Kansas City in late 2011, the frantic energy surrounding Lisa Irwin's disappearance began to fade. The massive search parties stopped. News crews moved on to other stories. The missing person posters started to weather and peel from telephone poles and store windows. But for the Irwin family, the nightmare was far from over. If anything, it was just beginning. Deborah Bradley and Jeremy Irwin found themselves living in a strange, suspended reality. Their daughter was gone, but they had no closure. No body had been found, which meant there was still hope Lisa was alive somewhere. But as weeks turned to months, that hope became increasingly difficult to maintain. The strain on their relationship was immense. Jeremy had stood by Debbie publicly, defending her against accusations that she'd harmed Lisa. But privately, questions lingered. Had she been too drunk that night to remember what really happened? Could something accidental have occurred that she couldn't or wouldn't admit? Jeremy wanted to believe in Debbie's innocence completely, but the doubts were there, eating away at him. Debbie, for her part, was drowning in guilt and anger. Guilt over having been drunk that night, over not being able to clearly remember checking on Lisa, over failing to protect her daughter. Anger at the police for treating her like a suspect instead of a victim. Anger at the media for painting her as a negligent mother or worse. Anger at a world that had stolen her baby and then blamed her for it. The older boys, Michael and Blake, were struggling too. They'd lost their baby sister. They didn't fully understand where Lisa had gone or why everyone was so upset. They heard the whispers at school, saw how other parents looked at their mother. The innocence of their childhood had been shattered. In November 2011, just over a month after Lisa's disappearance, Deborah and Jeremy did an interview with Megyn Kelly on Fox News. It was a controversial decision. Their attorneys advised against it, but the couple felt they needed to defend themselves publicly. During the interview, Deborah made a stunning admission. When Kelly asked if Debbie thought Lisa was still alive, Debbie paused, then said, "I don't know anymore. I was hopeful at first, but it's been so long. I just want to know what happened to her, even if the answer is terrible." Then Kelly asked the question everyone wanted answered. "Did you have anything to do with your daughter's disappearance?" Debbie looked directly into the camera. "No, absolutely not. I would never hurt Lisa. Never. I know people think I did because I was drinking that night, because I can't remember every detail. But I didn't hurt my baby. Someone took her from us." Jeremy added, "We just want Lisa back. That's all we've ever wanted. We want whoever has her to do the right thing." The interview was watched by millions. Some viewers found Deborah sympathetic, a mother destroyed by tragedy and accusation. Others found her suspicious, pointing to her body language, her word choices, inconsistencies in her story across different interviews. The court of public opinion had convicted Deborah Bradley long before any actual court could. Online forums dedicated to true crime were filled with theories about what really happened. Some believed Lisa had died accidentally, perhaps suffocated in her crib while Debbie was too drunk to notice, and that Debbie had panicked and disposed of the body. Others thought Jeremy must have been involved, that his alibi was too convenient. Still others believed the stranger abduction theory, that some predator had been watching the family and seized an opportunity. Every theory had its believers. None had definitive proof. As 2012 began, the investigation remained officially active, but progress had essentially stopped. Without cooperation from Deborah and Jeremy, without physical evidence, without credible leads, there was nowhere for detectives to go. The case wasn't closed, but it wasn't moving forward either. In March 2012, about 5 months after Lisa's disappearance, there was a brief moment of hope. A woman in New York reported seeing a child who looked like Lisa at a grocery store. She'd called police, who investigated immediately, but DNA testing proved the child was not Lisa Irwin. It was another dead end. Similar false sightings would occur periodically over the years. Every few months, someone would report seeing a child who resembled the age-progressed photos of what Lisa might look like. Each time, police would investigate. Each time, it would lead nowhere. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children created age progression images showing what Lisa might look like at age 2, then age 5, then age 10. Each new image was circulated widely, appearing on social media and news programs, but no credible leads emerged. For Deborah and Jeremy, life had to somehow continue. They still had 2 sons who needed them. Bills had to be paid. Daily routines had to be maintained. But everything was different now. The house on North Lister Avenue, once a home, had become a crime scene and then a haunted shell of what it used to be. Eventually, the family moved. They couldn't stay in the place where they'd lost Lisa. The relationship between Deborah and Jeremy deteriorated. The stress of losing Lisa, combined with the suspicion and media attention, was too much. By 2013, they had separated, though neither spoke publicly about the split. Jeremy maintained some contact with Debbie and the boys, but the family unit had been irreparably fractured. Debbie struggled with depression and anxiety. She'd never been formally charged with anything related to Lisa's disappearance, but the weight of suspicion followed her everywhere. Simple things like going to the grocery store became ordeals. People recognized her, whispered about her, judged her. She became increasingly isolated. Jeremy tried to move on with his life but carried an unbearable burden. His daughter was missing, possibly dead. The woman he'd loved and built a family with was the prime suspect. His 2 stepsons had lost their sister and been traumatized by the entire ordeal. How do you move forward from something like that? The community of Kansas City had mixed feelings about the case. Many residents had participated in the initial search efforts and remained sympathetic to the family. Others felt betrayed, believing they'd been manipulated into searching for a child whose parents knew she was already dead. Trust had been broken in profound ways. Local churches held prayer vigils for Lisa. On the anniversary of her disappearance each October, small groups would gather to light candles and remember the baby who'd vanished. Some still hoped for a miracle, that Lisa would be found alive somewhere, raised by someone who'd taken her. Most had accepted a darker truth. The case had broader impacts too. It sparked conversations about parental responsibility, about how quickly public opinion can turn against mothers, about the role of media in criminal investigations. Deborah Bradley became a polarizing figure. Some saw her as a victim of rush to judgment, others as a killer who got away with murder. Child safety experts used the case to educate parents about home security. Lock your windows, even on upper floors. Install security systems. Never leave children unattended, even for a moment. The assumption that your home is safe, that nothing bad can happen in your own neighborhood, was shattered. For the Kansas City Police Department, the case represented a significant failure. They'd had suspects, they'd had theories, but they'd never been able to close it. The lack of resolution was frustrating for investigators who'd poured hundreds of hours into trying to find Lisa. Some retired without ever learning what happened to that baby. Others continued to work the case on their own time, unable to let it go. Detective Young, who'd led the investigation, gave an interview years later reflecting on the case. "I believe we know what happened," he said carefully, "but knowing something and proving it beyond a reasonable doubt are very different. Without a body, without a confession, without definitive physical evidence, we couldn't move forward with charges. It's the most frustrating case of my career." When pressed about whether he believed Deborah Bradley was responsible, Young chose his words carefully. "I believe the answers to what happened to Lisa Irwin lie with the people who were in that house that night. That's all I can say." The tragedy of baby Lisa Irwin didn't just affect one family. It rippled outward, touching everyone who'd been involved in the search, every investigator who'd worked the case, every person who'd seen Lisa's face on a missing poster and wondered if they'd ever see her come home. By 2015, 4 years after Lisa's disappearance, the case had faded from national news but remained an open wound in Kansas City. Lisa would have been 5 years old, starting kindergarten. What would she have looked like? What would her personality have been? Would she have loved school, sports, art? These were questions her family would never have answered. The most haunting aspect of the case was the complete absence of closure. No body was ever found. No one was ever arrested. No confession was ever made. Lisa Irwin simply vanished, leaving behind only questions and heartbreak. More than a decade has passed since baby Lisa Irwin disappeared from her crib in Kansas City. In that time, countless theories have been proposed about what really happened that October night. None have been proven. All remain speculation. But examining these theories helps us understand why this case remains so compelling and so frustratingly unsolved. Theory 1. The stranger abduction. This is the theory Deborah Bradley and Jeremy Irwin have maintained from the beginning. An intruder entered their home through the window in Lisa's room, took the baby, and fled into the night. The missing cell phones were taken to delay police notification, or perhaps because they contained photos of Lisa that the abductor wanted. Evidence supporting this theory includes the damaged window screen, the witness sightings of a man carrying a baby at 2:15 a.m., and the presence of Jersey Tango in the area. Stranger abductions, while rare, do happen. Baby kidnappings by people unable to have children of their own, or by disturbed individuals with other motives, occur occasionally. The problems with this theory are significant. The crime scene lacked clear evidence of forced entry. No fingerprints from an unknown intruder were found. The window could have been staged to look like an entry point. And the statistical reality is stark. The vast majority of infant abductions are committed by family members, not strangers. Random home invasions targeting babies are extraordinarily rare. Additionally, if a stranger had taken Lisa, where is she? In most stranger abductions, either the child is recovered relatively quickly or evidence of foul play emerges. The complete absence of any trace of Lisa for over a decade strains credibility for this theory. Theory 2. The accidental death and cover-up. Many investigators and true crime analysts believe this is the most likely scenario. According to this theory, something happened to Lisa earlier in the evening, perhaps while Deborah was intoxicated. The baby could have suffocated, fallen, or died from some other accidental cause. Deborah, drunk and panicking, disposed of the body and staged the abduction scene to cover up what happened. This theory explains several puzzling elements. It accounts for why Debbie can't clearly remember the evening. It explains the staged window scene. It clarifies why Debbie immediately hired attorneys and stopped cooperating with police, not because she murdered Lisa intentionally, but because she was responsible for an accidental death and tried to cover it up. The theory is supported by Debbie's admission that she was heavily intoxicated and can't remember clearly checking on Lisa after 6:40 p.m. It's supported by her changing timeline and defensive behavior during interrogations. And it's supported by the complete absence of Lisa's body. If Debbie disposed of it while Jeremy was at work, she had nearly 10 hours to do so before he returned home. The main problem with this theory is logistics. How would an extremely intoxicated woman dispose of a body in a way that it's never been found, despite extensive searches? Where would she have taken it? How would she have transported it without a vehicle? And could she really have staged an elaborate cover-up while that drunk? Some variations of this theory suggest Jeremy was involved in the cover-up that Debbie called him at work, and he returned home to help dispose of Lisa's body before going back to his job site to maintain his alibi. But Jeremy's timeline was verified by co-workers and security systems. This variation seems unlikely. Theory 3. Intentional harm. The darkest theory is that one or both parents intentionally harmed Lisa. This theory is less popular because there's no clear motive. Deborah and Jeremy weren't wealthy. There was no insurance payout to gain. There were no signs of abuse or violence in the home before Lisa's disappearance. By all accounts, they loved their children. However, some theorists point to the stress of caring for 3 young children, financial pressures, and substance use as potential factors. Debbie's heavy drinking on the night of Lisa's disappearance is seen as significant. Could something have happened? Lisa crying inconsolably, Debbie losing her temper in an intoxicated state that led to intentional harm? This theory is the least supported by evidence. There's nothing in the family's history or the crime scene that suggests intentional violence. Most people who believe this theory do so based purely on suspicion of the parents' behavior after the disappearance, rather than concrete evidence of what happened before. Theory 4. The unknown. Third party. Some theorists believe someone other than a stranger or the parents was involved, perhaps someone known to the family. Debbie's brother, who was present earlier that evening, has been mentioned by some amateur sleuths, though there's no evidence implicating him. Other theories focus on neighbors, acquaintances, or someone who'd been watching the family. This theory attempts to bridge the gap between stranger abduction and parental involvement. It suggests someone familiar with the home's layout, someone who knew the family's routines, someone who had access or opportunity that a random stranger wouldn't have. The problem is that police thoroughly investigated everyone in the family's circle. Alibis were checked. Backgrounds were examined. No credible alternate suspect emerged from these investigations beyond Jersey Tanko, and even he couldn't be definitively connected to Lisa's disappearance. The question that haunts every theory is the same. Where is Lisa Irwin? If she died accidentally or intentionally and her body was disposed of, where is it? Kansas City police searched landfills, ponds, wooded areas, and construction sites. Nothing was found. If she was abducted by a stranger or acquaintance and is still alive, why hasn't she been found? It's incredibly difficult to hide a child in modern America. She would need medical care, eventually schooling, and a fabricated identity. Someone would have noticed. Someone would have said something. The most likely explanation, according to many experts, remains the accidental death and cover-up theory. But without Lisa's body, without a confession, without physical evidence, it remains just that, a theory. The legacy of baby Lisa Irwin's disappearance extends beyond the specifics of her case. It's become a touchstone in discussions about missing children, about how quickly suspicion falls on mothers, about the role of media in criminal investigations. Deborah Bradley has become a polarizing figure in true crime communities. Some see her as a grieving mother wrongly accused, driven to drinking that night by the stress of single-handedly caring for 3 children. Others see her as a killer who escaped justice, protected by the thin line between suspicion and proof. The case highlighted how difficult it is to prosecute crimes without bodies. Prosecutors need evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. In Lisa's case, they had suspicions, inconsistencies, and a circumstantial case. But no prosecutor believed they could convict based on what they had. So no charges were ever filed. This reality, that someone may have gotten away with harming a child because the evidence wasn't strong enough, haunts many people who followed the case. It raises uncomfortable questions about justice, about burden of proof, about how we balance the rights of the accused against the needs of victims. For Kansas City, the case left a scar. It's a story locals know, a tragedy that became part of the city's identity. When people think of Kansas City true crime, baby Lisa Irwin is one of the first cases mentioned. And for the true crime community globally, Lisa's case remains a compelling mystery. YouTube videos about her disappearance have millions of views. Reddit threads debate the theories. Podcasts revisit the evidence. New generations of true crime fans discover the case and try to solve it with fresh eyes. But for all the analysis, all the theories, all the speculation, one truth remains. Lisa Irwin has never been found. 13 years after that October night, Lisa would be a teenager now, 14 years old. She'd be in high school, navigating friendships and homework and all the challenges of adolescence. She'd have her mother's features, her father's smile, perhaps. She'd have dreams for her future, plans for what she wanted to be when she grew up. Instead, she's frozen in time as a 10-month-old baby with blonde hair and blue eyes, wearing purple clothes with white kittens. Somewhere, the truth of what happened exists. Someone knows. Whether that someone will ever speak, whether justice will ever be served, whether the Irwin family will ever have closure, these questions remain unanswered. Baby Lisa Irwin's case is still officially open. The Kansas City Police Department maintains that any new information or leads will be investigated. The hope, however slim, is that someday, somehow, answers will emerge. Until then, Lisa remains one of America's most haunting missing child cases. A reminder that sometimes the questions linger long after the headlines fade, that some mysteries resist solution, and that the disappearance of a single child can echo through time, touching countless lives and leaving wounds that never fully heal. The disappearance of baby Lisa Irwin is a tragedy without resolution. It's a story of a family destroyed, a community traumatized, and a mystery that persists over a decade later. Whatever the truth might be, one fact is indisputable. An innocent 10-month-old child vanished, and no one has been held accountable. For Deborah Bradley, life has continued under the shadow of suspicion. She's never been formally accused of any crime, yet she lives with the weight of judgment every day. Whether she's a grieving mother wrongly blamed or someone harboring a terrible secret, only she knows for certain. For Jeremy Irwin, the loss of his daughter and the disintegration of his family represent wounds that may never heal. He loved Lisa. He wanted answers. He never got them. For Michael and Blake, Lisa's older brothers, their baby sister, exists only in fragmented memories and photographs. They grew up in the aftermath of a tragedy that defined their childhood and shaped who they became. And for Lisa herself, wherever she is, whatever happened to her, her story deserves to be remembered. She was more than a case file, more than a headline, more than a mystery. She was a real child who deserved to grow up, to experience life, to be loved and protected. If you have any information about the disappearance of Lisa Irwin, please contact the Kansas City Police Department or the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Even the smallest detail could be the one that finally brings answers. Cases like Lisa's remind us how fragile safety is, how quickly everything can change, and how important it is to protect the most vulnerable among us. They also remind us that some questions may never be answered, some wounds never fully healed. Thank you for watching. If this case affected you, please leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Subscribe to Seek Stories for more deep dives into mysterious disappearances and true crime cases. And remember, somewhere out there, someone knows what happened to baby Lisa Irwin. Until that truth emerges, we remember her, we honor her memory, and we hope that someday justice will be served.